The Filipino sun rose slowly over the dusty streets of General Santos City, painting the sky in orange hues that reflected off the simple wooden and zinc houses. Manny walked through the same narrow alleys where he had run barefoot decades ago. When hunger was a constant companion and dreams seemed like impossible luxuries, his hands, now calloused from countless rounds in the ring, trembled slightly as he held the keys to the imported car he had parked at the community entrance. The decision to return to this place had not been planned. During a casual conversation with his wife the night before, a forgotten memory emerged like a precise punch to his consciousness. He remembered the small chapel where his mother, Aling Rosa, took him every Sunday morning, even when they barely had anything to eat. It was there that she would kneel on the cold cement floor and whisper desperate prayers for a better future for her youngest son. The familiar aroma of fried fish and steamed rice lingered in the morning air, instantly transporting him to a time when these scents represented unattainable dreams. Children played in the narrow streets, their laughter echoing between the cramped houses, exactly as he had done at their age. Some recognized him and waved shyly, whispering among themselves the name that had become legendary not only in the Philippines, but around the world. Manny stopped before a puddle formed by the previous night's rain, seeing reflected not the world champion, who had conquered titles in 8 different categories, but the skinny boy who sold gum and cigarettes on street corners to help his family. Tears began to form in his eyes as he remembered how his mother held his small, calloused hand, promising that God had special plans for him. The distant sound of church bells echoed through the community, calling the faithful to morning mass. It was the same sound that awakened him every morning of his childhood, when he slept in a bed shared with 3 brothers and dreamed of a day when he could buy enough food for everyone. Taking a deep breath, he adjusted the cap that tried to disguise his identity and began walking toward the small chapel that had shaped his faith and his first prayers. The San Miguel Archangel Church remained exactly as it was in his oldest memories, with its walls faded by time and the small bell tower that leaned slightly to the left. The rusty iron gate creaked when Manny pushed it, producing the same sound that haunted his nostalgic dreams. Loose stones under his feet created an irregular path to the main entrance, where a weathered sign still displayed mass times in letters that could barely be read. Upon crossing the threshold, Manny was immediately enveloped by the smell of melted candles and old wood. The chapel's interior was even smaller than he remembered, with dark wooden pews that showed decades of use and devotion. Light filtered through simple stained glass windows, created colorful patterns on the polished cement floor, the same floor where his mother used to kneel for hours, moving her lips in silent prayers that he now understood were desperate pleas for hope. Father Miguel, an elderly man with completely white hair, was organizing hymn books near the altar. His trembling hands handled each object with the care of someone who had dedicated his entire life to religious service. When he noticed Manny's presence, his eyes lit up with recognition that transcended the physical changes of the years. It was the same priest who had baptized the future champion and offered words of comfort during the family's most difficult moments. The simple altar, decorated only with wildflowers that someone had picked from the church's backyard, remained as a symbol of humility and genuine faith. Manny remembered how he used to stare fixedly at the wooden crucifix during long masses, wondering if God really listened to the prayers of poor boys like him. The image of Jesus Christ, with paint peeling in some spots, seemed to observe him with the same compassion it had offered during his troubled childhood. Tears began to stream down Manny's face as he walked slowly down the center aisle, gently touching the pews where he had sat with his family. Each step awakened buried memories. His first communion in borrowed clothes, Christmas masses, when his mother cried with gratitude for the few gifts they managed to give the children, and Sundays when they arrived with empty stomachs but hearts full of hope. The third row pew on the left still bore the same mark that Manny had accidentally made with a rusty coin during a particularly long mass. He ran his fingers over the small scratch in the wood, remembering how his mother had gently scolded him, explaining that God's house deserved respect even when they had little more than respect to offer. That lesson about dignity and poverty had shaped his character in ways he was only now beginning to fully understand. Sitting in the same spot where he used to squeeze between his brothers, Manny closed his eyes and allowed memories to flow freely. He could almost feel the warmth of his mother's thin body beside him, hear her whispering prayers in Tagalog while her calloused hands held a worn rosary. She always asked God to protect her children and give them opportunities she had never had, never asking for anything for herself. The sound of gentle footsteps pulled him from his reminiscences. An elderly woman, wearing a simple blue cotton dress, walked slowly toward the altar carrying a small vase with fresh flowers. Her deliberate and respectful movements reminded Manny of his own mother, who had passed away a few years earlier without having the chance to see all the successes her son would achieve. The pain of loss, which he had tried to bury under achievements and victories, resurfaced with devastating force. Hot tears streamed freely down his face as he watched the woman arrange the flowers with maternal care. Each of her gestures echoed the hundreds of times he had seen his mother do the same thing, always insisting that God deserved the most beautiful offerings they could provide, even if they were just wildflowers picked from the vacant lot behind their house. The simplicity of that act of devotion contrasted dramatically with the complexity of his current life. The weight of all the victories, defeats, fame and responsibilities he had carried over the years seemed to concentrate in his chest like a clenched fist. Manny realized that despite having conquered world titles and international recognition, he was still that frightened boy who clung to his mother's skirts, seeking protection in a world that seemed too big and threatening for his small hands to face alone. Father Miguel approached slowly, his footsteps echoing softly on the chapel's cement floor. His kind eyes glistened with unshed tears as he fully recognized the man who had become the boy he had blessed so many times. Without saying a word, the priest sat beside Manny, offering his silent presence as a balm for the pain that was clearly consuming the world champion's heart. The elderly woman arranging the flowers turned and, recognizing Manny, smiled with a warmth that transcended any fame or recognition. It was Arling Carmen, a neighbor who had known his family during the most difficult years. Her wrinkled eyes filled with tears of joy at seeing the boy who used to play on her street, transformed into the man who had made the entire Filipino nation proud. Arling Carmen approached slowly, her worn sandals making small sounds against the floor. She extended a trembling hand and gently touched Manny's face, like a grandmother would touch her beloved grandson. The simple gesture broke the last emotional barriers he had built over the years, and he began to sob openly, releasing decades of pressure, expectations, and repressed longing. Father Miguel placed a calloused hand on Manny's shoulder, offering the same comfort he had given to the frightened boy who used to confess his small sins and big fears. The weight of that familiar hand brought a sense of security he hadn't experienced in years, reminding him that some things remain constant even when the entire world changes around them. The chapel, which moments before seemed empty and silent, now pulsed with an energy of unconditional love and acceptance. Manny realized that regardless of how many championship belts he had won or how many people screamed his name in packed arenas, it was in this humble place, among simple people who knew him before fame, that he found his true identity and inner peace. Tears continued to flow as Manny observed the chapel details that had remained unchanged by time. The wooden ceiling still showed the same humidity stains he used to study during long masses of his childhood, creating imaginary shapes that fed his restless imagination. Each architectural imperfection carried a story, a memory, a fragment of his formation as a person before becoming a public personality. Arling Carmen returned with a clean cloth and gently wiped the tears from Manny's face, as she did with her own grandchildren. Her warm eyes reflected decades of wisdom and compassion, reminding him that a person's true value was not measured by external achievements, but by the ability to keep the heart connected to its deepest roots. The simplicity of that maternal gesture awakened in him a gratitude that transcended words. Father Miguel slowly rose and walked to a small drawer behind the altar, from which he retrieved an old book of parish records. The pages yellowed by time contained names, dates, and events that marked the community's life over decades. With careful fingers, he leafed through until he found the page he was looking for, showing Manny the record of his baptism, written in careful calligraphy that was still legible after so many years. The sight of his name written in that sacred book alongside hundreds of other names of ordinary people from the community, impacted Manny in a way that no victory in the ring had achieved. He realized that his journey had begun in that humble place, with simple people who invested their prayers and hopes in a boy who barely had enough to eat, but who carried dreams bigger than his immediate reality. The soft sound of wind through the chapel's open windows brought with it the aroma of flowers from the community garden, mixed with the familiar smell of food being prepared in neighboring houses. That sensory combination awakened in Manny a deep understanding that his true strength came not only from muscles developed through rigorous training, but from the emotional and spiritual roots that had been planted in that sacred soil of his childhood. While leafing through the pages of the record book, Father Miguel stopped at a section that Manny had never seen before. These were personal notes that the priest made about each family in the community, including specific prayers and pastoral concerns. The entry about his family revealed details that surprised him deeply: how his mother had confided to the priest her fears about not being able to adequately feed her children, and how she constantly asked God to give Manny a special opportunity in life. The notes also revealed that several community members had anonymously contributed to help his family during the most difficult moments. People he had always considered as poor as his own family had sacrificed their own meals to ensure that he and his brothers didn't go completely hungry. These discoveries completely reorganized his understanding of how he had survived the most challenging years of his childhood. Arling Carmen approached again, this time carrying a small worn wooden box. Inside it, carefully preserved, were old photographs of the community during religious festivals and celebrations. In one of them, Manny saw himself at 7 years old, thin and smiling, holding his mother's hand during a procession. His childish eyes shone with an innocence and hope that contrasted sharply with the responsibilities he currently carried. Another photograph showed the moment of his first communion, where he appeared wearing borrowed clothes that were clearly too big for his frail body. In the background of the image, several people from the community watched with proud smiles, as if he were everyone's son. Manny realized that his journey to becoming world champion had been sustained by an invisible network of love and support that extended far beyond his immediate family. Emotion completely overwhelmed him when he found a letter his mother had written to Father Miguel shortly before her death. In it, she expressed her gratitude for all the prayers and support the community had offered, and her confidence that God would use her son to honor not only his family, but all the simple people who had invested their faith in him. Those words revealed to Manny the true weight and responsibility of his successes. His mother's letter continued with words that pierced directly into his heart. She expressed her hope that regardless of the heights Manny reached in life, he would never forget the simple people who had planted the seeds of his journey. She asked God that her son would always remember that his fists were blessed not only to conquer personal victories, but to carry the prayers and hopes of an entire community that had believed in him when he was just an impossible dream. Father Miguel then revealed something he had kept as a secret during all those years. In the most difficult moments of Manny's childhood, when the family was on the brink of total starvation, he himself had discreetly organized a support network in the community. Local merchants contributed small amounts, housewives prepared extra meals, and even children from other families shared their school lunches. All of this happened without Manny's family knowing, preserving their dignity while ensuring their survival. The discovery that dozens of people had silently sacrificed to ensure he had a chance in life completely transformed Manny's perspective on his achievements. Each title he had won, each knockout he had delivered, each moment of glory he had experienced carried with it the invisible investment of people who would never ask for recognition or return. His successes were not just his own, but belonged to an entire community that had bet on him when he was nothing more than a boy with dreams too big for his reality. Ailing Carmen shared her own memories of how she used to see Manny's mother walking the streets before dawn. Looking for extra work to earn a few additional coins, she related how the entire community silently rooted for the boy's success, not because they expected something in return, but because they saw in him the hope that it was possible to transcend the limitations imposed by poverty through determination and faith. Manny's tears now carried a different weight. They were no longer just tears of nostalgia or longing, but tears of gratitude so deep it threatened to break his chest. He understood that every person who had crossed his path during childhood had somehow contributed to shaping the man he had become, and that his responsibility went far beyond simply winning fights in the ring. As the Filipino sun began to set, painting the chapel walls with golden tones, Manny remained seated on the same pew where he had made his first conscious prayers. The weight of discovering his community's silent love had transformed something fundamental in his soul. He realized that all his future successes should be dedicated not to his own glory, but to honoring the memory of all those who had invested their faith in a boy who seemed to have everything against him. Father Miguel approached the altar and lit a candle, as he had done every night for decades. The small flame flickered in the gentle breeze that entered through the open windows, creating dancing shadows on the weathered walls. That simple light symbolized the continuity of faith and hope that had sustained the community through generations of hardships and small daily victories. Ailing Carmen once again gently touched Manny's face, this time whispering a simple blessing that her own mother used to recite. The words in Tagalog carried centuries of maternal wisdom and spiritual protection, reminding him that regardless of how far his career took him, he would always have a spiritual home in that humble place where his journey had truly begun. With his heart overflowing with emotion and renewed purpose, Manny slowly rose from the pew. He knew his life had been permanently altered by that visit, not through grand gestures or grandiose projects, but through a silent commitment to carry with him, in every fight and in every victory, the responsibility of honoring all those who had believed in him when believing was the only investment they could make. As he left the chapel, Manny turned one last time to observe the interior that had shaped his soul. The candles continued burning softly. Father Miguel was organizing the final details for evening mass, and Ailing Carmen was finishing the flower arrangement with the same maternal care as always. He understood that this place and these people represented his true wealth, and that all the world championship belts were not worth even a fraction of the unconditional love he had received in those simple wooden pews. Walking out into the Filipino night, he carried with him not just memories, but a renewed purpose to live each day as a form of gratitude to those who had made his impossible dreams possible.
Leave your like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next cases.